Welcome to the Elk Talk Podcast with Randy Newberg and Corey Jacobson. Presented by the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation.
The goal is, what little you and I know about elk hunting, we share with people.
I've got an elk bugle, it's like 120 yards away. What do I do? First off, the thought would never cross my mind when an elk's bugle 120 yards away to call anybody on a cell phone.
All elk?
All the time? Only elk?
Only elk.
Well, it's us having conversations, so we usually go down some rabbit holes, but
If you hunt with Corey Jacobson, you will find the landscape is full of rabbit holes. We're just going to make this up as we go.
and you look at it like, oh, that's a target-rich environment. But if you're trying to single one out, a solo target there is much easier to go into than a big group.
We record everything, so there's no BS and no lying, no faking it with us.
Did we hit the record
I thought
button?
I forgot to hit the record button. If you want to know something about elk hunting, this probably isn't the podcast to listen to. Should we give them a list of all the other podcasts where they might learn something? The Elk Talk Podcast is brought to you by the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, ensuring the future of elk, other wildlife, their habitat, and our hunting heritage. To become a member, go to rmef.org.
The Elk Talk Podcast is also brought to you by Mountain Ops, making outdoor energy and performance nutrition to make you a stronger and healthier elk hunter. They have a full line of hunting-related supplements, including meal replacement shakes, multivitamins, pre-workout fuel, and post-workout recovery. And my favorite, their new performance protein bars that, by the way, are packed with 270 calories and 20 grams of protein, but contain less than 6 grams of sugar. Visit mountainops.com to learn more and to order, and be sure to use the promo code ELKTALK to save on your next order.
The podcast is also brought to you by Gerber. Go to gerbergear.com and learn about the knives, the Vital, the Big Game Vital, the Gator Premium, all the things that we use when we're out in the woods, and not just knives, but also some really cool multi-tools that they have.
And we have a promo code for Gerber as well. Just use the code ELKTALK to save 20% on your orders at gerbergear.com. And we are also brought to you by Rocky Mountain Hunting Calls. And Rocky Mountain Hunting Calls is the original designer and inventor of the pallet plate diaphragm that's completely changed the way elk calls are made and used. And to find out more and to order your elk calls, go to RockyMountainHuntingCalls.com or BuglingBull.com and use promo code ELKTALK, and you're going to save 15% on all of your elk calls and elk call accessories.
The Elk Talk Podcast is also brought to you by GoHunt.com. Go to GoHunt.com and sign up for the Insider. The Insider is changing how hunts and hunting information are found. No doubt about that. Use promo code ELKTALK, and when you sign up for the Insider, you're going to get $50 of store credit, mad money, in their gear shop.
Lastly, the University of Elk Hunting online course is a proud partner of the Elk Talk Podcast. And within the University of Elk Hunting online course, you're going to find nearly 60 chapters organized in 17 modules of elk hunting instruction aimed at making you a more successful elk hunter. From planning and e-scouting to calling strategies and packing, every imaginable elk hunting topic is included in the online course. And regardless of your previous elk hunting experience or success, I'm confident the University of Elk Hunting online course will make you a more confident, more successful elk hunter. Just visit elk101.com and use the promo code ELKTALK to save 20% when you sign up for a membership to the University of Elk Hunting online course.
And with that, Corey, we are ready to get into it.
Let's jump into it.
Good morning, Corey.
Good morning, Randy. How are you?
I'm good. I'm really good.
You sound a little tired.
I am. I flew back from Oregon the other night, and I had to swap planes in Seattle, and I ran from the C concourse, took the little shuttle thing underneath the tunnel there over to the N concourse because it said I had 14 minutes till my flight left. I ran all the way over there, got all sweated up, and I get there and it says, "Oh, your flight is delayed 2 hours." It's like I could have crawled over here, but so yeah. If I'm tired or sound tired, that's why. But Yeah, you want to know?
I thought maybe it was daylight savings time that had done it. I heard this morning that there's all sorts of crashes and wrecks going on this week because everybody's tired and they don't know how to drive when they're tired. So it's causing an increase in accidents.
When did daylight savings time hit?
That was Saturday night, Sunday morning. Yeah.
That's why it was so early for my flight. Just kidding.
Oh, I was going to say, holy cow.
So the fun part about today is we for all you guests who've been waiting for some real elk hunting information, do we have a treat for you today?
Are we going to tell them which podcast they should go listen to learn something finally?
This one.
They get to learn on this one today.
Yeah, because all the way from Reno, Nevada, I believe. Remy, are you in Reno today?
I am, yep.
And Remy with the broken arm.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm stretching it out. I got to keep it elevated.
He was pulling up to show us. I have a broken arm.
It just gets really sore, and I got to keep it up above my heart.
Well, with us today is Mr. Remy Warren, who I don't know that Remy needs any introduction. We were hoping that he'd take over this podcast instead of starting his own. Because the world could use some good elk hunting information. When Corey's on the podcast, Remy, they get good information. When I'm mostly doing it, I think they're just here for some real low quality entertainment value. So, appreciate you being here. What's the story with your arm in a cast?
Oh, well, I actually I had to have my wrist essentially completely rebuilt because I tore all the tendons in there and a lot of the ligaments. So they had to open it up on both sides, and then they took some of the, I guess, tendons from inside my forearm and then drilled holes in all those little bones in my wrist and then wrapped the tendons in there and then reconnected the missing things and then screwed the tendon to the new tendon to my forearm, to my radius. So it's I can just start to move my fingers now. It's a little weird. My thumb still has no feeling, but
wow.
Yeah, it's like I got to just keep the fingers moving and try to keep it limber. And it's going to be a little bit of recovery. So
when did they do that?
3 weeks ago. I damaged it last year, but I found out it was like, just standard man stuff where I was like, oh, I'll tape my fingers together. And then like, surely it'll be fine. And then I like kind of lost the use of my hand for about 3 months. And someone was like, when it ended up coming out, or like, I was kind of like, just, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. And I shot a big elk last year and there's a couple guys with me and I'm going to skin it and I have to tape the knife in my hand because I can't hold it. And they're like,
no way.
They're like, that's messed up, man. You should probably get that checked out.
Remy Warren is like that wannabe. He's the follow-up to, if you've ever seen Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
Oh yeah,
they cut the guy's arm off. Oh, just a flesh wound. They cut his other arm off. Yeah, come back here, you coward! He's bouncing around on one remaining leg, and that's modern day Remy Warren.
Yeah, so I was like, man, my hand is just. So I went to the doctor, and I'm like, oh, he's just gonna tell me it's like just he's just gonna tell me, it'll get better, whatever. And he comes back and he's like, this is a major injury. This is an extremely rare and extremely extensive surgery. There's only a few people in the world that can redo these. And I'm like, oh man. And he's like, when can we schedule you? And I was like, how long? I was like, what? How long does it take? He's like, you need 6 months to recover. I was like, what? Then we're going to wait. We're waiting until February. So I went through the whole hunting season with it. I kind of hid it a little bit because I had like a brace if I needed to do stuff, but I still did all my guiding and everything. And it was kind of painful, but at some point you just kind of get used to it. And then now it's so hopefully it's going to all be working here in a little bit. So I get this thing cut off at the end of the month, and then I'm going to chase some red deer in Argentina the very next day. So we'll see how it goes.
I guess you're going to be rifle hunting.
Yeah, I was gonna. So I'm trying to figure out the mouth tab thing, but I just didn't have enough time.
Yeah.
I probably should have started it. If anybody has something like this, my suggestion would be start the mouth tab before you have the cert. You know what I mean? Because I was like, now I've got a couple days and I've been on the road a little bit, so not enough time. But I've got a hunt planned in May that I'm going to do with the mouth tab. So, and then probably by then, by August, I'll be ready to rock and roll with the bow. So. I was really hoping to bow hunt, but that kind of put a damper on some of the plans. Just adapt.
So how did you hurt your wrist? That's the burning question here.
Yeah, it's I think it was a compounding thing. What set it off was, it's really embarrassing. That's
why I asked the question. Yeah. I knew it wasn't going to be like you didn't wrestle an alligator or anything.
No. It was a mallard duck. I sky busted this duck that was flying full tilt about 60 feet up, and it was coming in hot, and I was like, I'll just catch it. And I put my hand up. And I was like, when my two middle fingers touched my forearm, I should have, and I didn't even catch it. If I would have caught it, it would have been fine. But it definitely dropped after that. And, so then that's when I kind of taped the fingers up and was like, and then I think it was actually more extensive damage than I thought and never actually healed right. And then I think just over the course of a little bit of time, it wore out. Or it had been torn, and then just using it a little bit. I had a baby girl, and just holding the baby, I think really got it kind of messed up. And then I was on my first hunt last year. I guess it was the beginning of August. Sheep hunting, and I was just using my trekking pole in the steep shale stuff, and the wrist just gave out, just went right into the hill. So I think that's what dislocated the bones after that. And then and then I was just like, okay, and I'm like, I'll just use my other hand, my left hand. So it's just compounding.
So Remy, can I ask what your undergraduate study was? Because I know Corey was a mechanical engineer.
I was in marketing business.
Okay. Yeah. The reason I ask is I'm thinking about the physics of a 6-pound Drake mallard going 35 miles an hour. And trying to catch that. Okay.
There's a lot of energy there. And I probably would have been fine, but I was wearing neoprene gloves and my fingers couldn't go together, so they were spread out. I blame the neoprene because I feel like I could have nabbed it had I not had my fingers so inoperable.
Or if you would have just taped your fingers together in the neoprene, you probably would have been fine.
Probably would have been fine. Yeah. Or just bring a good mitt, I think that would have absorbed some of the energy.
Oh man,
I mean, if you can catch a 150 mile an hour line drive, I should be able to catch a falling duck.
I think there's that mass times velocity problem there. The mass might be more the problem.
I think you're right.
Well, this is better than I ever. I sent this outline of ideas we should talk about. Little did I know that Remy would have such a cool story about duck hunting. It would be a better story, Remy, if you said I'd hit this elk and I dropped my bow thinking he was dead, and when I walked over there, I had to wrestle him down or something.
I know. I was in between the duck and then having to get the surgery. I was really hoping to have a crazy bear encounter where I could punch him in the face.
I was hoping Remy would say that he fell off a ladder putting up Christmas lights, or that he, got carpal tunnel from running a snowblower or something like that, just so that we could see Randy get all worked up and explain how he doesn't do any of that stuff.
Nope, I don't. In fact, when I was in Redmond, Oregon last week, I do a Q&A session, and one of them, somehow we got on the topic of Christmas lights. And I said, I know that 70% of statistics are made up on the spot, but I'm going to give you one here that about 50% of injuries to men over 50 are falling off ladders and porches putting up Christmas lights. So I don't do Christmas lights.
I think that's a pretty safe bet. Or a pretty safe statistic.
Yeah, I mean, if I ever did it, they would be there forever. It'd be house for sale, Christmas lights included, because I'd never go take them down. But oh well. So now we're gonna, since we got a guest who's, Corey's modesty, he doesn't always let out all the good elk hunting information. I don't have any, so now we have an opportunity to provide some to the guest. I guess the thing going back to your comment, Remy, about how you had to tape your knife to your hand. I saw pictures of a humongous bull that you arrowed last fall.
Yeah, that was the bull.
Was
the knife
it?
tape bull? Yeah.
Oh man. Is there more of a story to that than just, well, he walked in, I shot him, and then I had to tape my knife to my hand?
No, that's about it. No, I mean, you hit all the key points there. No, I mean, I think it was I was actually in an area where there's not really big bulls, so I wasn't expecting. I was actually not hunting for a big bull. I was hunting for a bull. I'm sure you guys have been in areas where you're like, yeah, mostly kind of top end bulls, 270 to 300. I was looking for a 6-point, and then we had one encounter that day, and there was there was a bull that was working that, I think it was the day before, and it was just like a little raghorn. I was like, oh, I know for sure I could call this bull in, and I was just like, I got to walk away from this situation because I'm probably going to end up killing this bull, and I was like, I don't even want to try, And so the next day, the night before, we spotted a really nice bull, and so the next morning hiked in after him, got call in. We're on this ridge in this little burn, and that bull was, bugled right on the other side, maybe 20 yards, but doing that thing that's like, it was early September, so it was the first couple days of September, and just kind of ended up going the other way. I think just, I don't know if he actually had a cow or if he was just trying something new or didn't want to come in to where we could see him, or if he got spooked, whatever. So there's another bull bugling across the way. And so we drop down, do that thing, and it's like bugling back and forth. And that bull's up on this point, just kind of stand like just there, not moving. And it sounded like, it was like a bunch of lone bulls trying to, maybe get some cows to come to them or whatever they were doing. And so we dropped down, and I dropped down and bugle, and I hear that bull bugle off on our side now. So I was like, oh, he's kind of coming. So I didn't want to give away our position and be in a bad spot. So we started moving up toward this other bull, and it's just really thick. And there wasn't a good opportunity for a shooting lane. So I was going like super quiet. I didn't want that bull to come to us where I couldn't get a shot. So I found there's like a little old logging road, and it was so steep in there and really thick. And I thought, okay, if I cross this little logging road, there is a little burned out patch, and I can call him right there. It'll be perfect. So just as I crossed, there's two guys filming, and they were like stopped on the logging road. And I hear the bull bugle like 15 yards away from us. I'm like, oh crap. And he's walking down that logging road. Now I've got no shot. He sees the other two guys, and it was such a bummer, where you're like, you did everything right. And it was a matter of seconds that you ended up not getting this bull. And it was a nice 6-point bull. So we're like, okay, a little bit defeated, go down. All the bulls shut up. And so I just said, hey, let's make a different plan. We're going to go into a place that people probably don't want to go into, real thick stuff, and just try to call a bull that's bedded. But I don't know, it's kind of a tactic that I use a lot, especially early, where I'm just hoping that there's a bull that's bedded. Maybe he's with cows, maybe he's not. And then I get him to just come out of his bed. Sometimes when you get right up in their zone, they just pretty much run right in. So we were doing that, and got into that area, letting out calls just, pretty much every 100, 200 yards, because it's just thick enough where I didn't think the sound would travel very far. And sure enough, we're at one spot where, we decided to take a little break, have some lunch. I made a lucky fruit roll-up. I ate my lucky fruit roll-up. Then about 100 yards later, I call, and I hear a bugle, and I turned to the guys. I was like, okay, they're recording and everything. And I'm like, hey, I'm going to call again. And if he's closer, then we know that bull wants to play. And I make a cow call, and he bugles at half the distance he was. And I'm like, jump in the bushes. We jump in the bushes, and 45 seconds later, he comes out screaming, and I shoot him at 47 yards. And then he runs off, and I walk up to him and go, wow, that's the biggest elk I've ever put my hands on. It was very, very unexpected. So it was pretty sweet.
You make that sound pretty easy, Remy.
It was easy. Everybody played their part. Everybody did what they had to do right, which was pretty crazy. And I mean, I was never expecting a bull like that from there. I mean, it was a bull. I actually got him scored. What he scored? His official score was 388 and change, and netted 378. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's the biggest bull I've ever killed with my bow.
Yeah. Did you have any idea when he walked before he walked out? Did you have any idea?
No. I saw him walk out, and I said, "That's a giant." And then. And I was thinking it's so thick too. I just knew it was a big bull, but I was like kind of in my head, like 360 type bull, and thinking, wow, that's a way big bull. Don't mess this up. He was like, when I took the shot, he was behind a bunch of stuff, and he was standing there, and the wind started to swirl. And I just thought oh, this is not going to be good. So I drew back, and I had about a football size shape opening. And then he started to take one step, and I just scooched over a little bit, gave him a call, and then let it rip. And I was right before I shot, I said, please don't hit that branch, because there was one branch. I was really threading the needle, and I was really analyzing it. And I'm like, do not, if I hit that, it was like one of those things where it found its mark. And I was really glad. I took a few seconds to analyze whether I thought it was going to hit the branch or not. And I truly believed it wasn't. So I let it fly. Because I didn't think that the wind wasn't going to hold for us. And I pretty much had to take that opportunity. The nice thing was the yardage that it was is essentially when I step out of my door, I've got a target that I call my home target that essentially it's right at 47 yards. So I shoot that distance probably more than any other distance. So it felt really nice. It's where my pin kind of sits anyways, is right at 47. So I was pretty fortunate that, I've messed with that yardage enough to kind of understand the drop, because I only have a single pin. So I knew that I was pretty confident that it was going to make that little gap.
Man, wish I had that kind of confidence.
As Remy's talking, I couldn't resist. I jumped out to YouTube. Looks like there's video of this hunt on your YouTube channel.
Yep, there is. Yeah.
Oh, really? Oh,
yeah.
Cool. I thought maybe you were holding it for some special occasion, Remy. I was out on your website messing around yesterday. I didn't see anything out there about videos or anything. I thought, well, maybe Remy just uses all this video for his own fun and just has his own private collection library or something.
Yeah, I actually have a pretty extensive private collection. I've decided I need to do something with a lot of it. But some of the best hunts that I've ever done, I filmed them completely and haven't even edited. It's there's just stuff gets so backed up, I don't have time to edit things. And then I'm like, man, or I have something that I think is so cool. I was like, I really want to do a good edit on it, and then just keep putting it off for 10 years. I'm like, well, just throw this away now. But
darn. Don't do that. Yeah. I've got 10 production employees, and they don't have much to do. They've been fishing all winter. So if you need somebody to do something, I could see if I could interrupt their fishing this winter.
Oh, there you go.
Help you out.
Yeah, I might take you up on that. A Fognac elk hunt with my brother is one of the coolest hunts I've ever filmed, and just have days of foot. I could probably make 5 episodes out of it, and it's pretty cool. A lot of cool encounters and grizzly bears and all kinds of crazy stuff happened. And yeah, it'd be pretty. That's one that I gotta put in the queue at sometime in my life.
So here the three of us are, and I'm the only guy who's never hunted elk in Alaska.
I would say that puts you at the top of the list when it comes to IQ.
Yeah.
I don't know what Remy's experience was like, but holy cow.
I've done it 3 times now. So I'm still, it's like, I just never learn from my mistakes. Just like, I like to tape the knife in my hand and keep beating my head against the trees, you know?
Well, I'm sure that the audience hearing your story, Remy, I'm going to let you and Corey get into details here about this because I'm just an observer. But you were talking about this whole calling sequence and what you were doing and why you thought this and why you thought that. And you said something that I've heard Corey mention many times about if you can get close enough and kind of get them mad. I'd be interested for you guys to do a dive in about how do you do that when you got a bull bedded with a group of cows.
No, and I think even stepping back a little further, and just in case there is 2 or 3 people that don't know who Remy is, Remy, give us just a quick overview of who you are, what you do.
Yeah, so I mean, I pretty much got my start as an elk guide. I'd say probably since I was like 18. My full-time thing was just guiding elk hunters, mostly, I mean, all over the place, New Mexico, Montana, mostly Montana. Now I also have an outfitting business in Montana. And I did do a lot of writing, did some writing still do for Western Hunter magazine. Also do like a lot of videos and stuff. I've got a YouTube channel. Used to have a show, or still do. I mean, we still do Solo Hunter. It used to be on Sportsman's and Outdoor channel. So just kind of would go out and do some self-filmed hunts. And then, now I've got a podcast as well, Live Wild podcast. Just kind of do a lot of different things, but really cut my teeth and made essentially a living guiding elk hunters for a very long time. I guess probably over. Just too much math. This would be someone else's department, but close to 20 years.
Nice. No, and that's so I listened to. You've got 2 episodes out now on Live Wild. Is that?
Yep, that's correct.
2 of them out. So I listened to the first one, and it was The Eyes Have It. And as I'm listening to you describe, mostly spot and stalk and how you get close to animals and how you avoid detection with their eyes, the way that you lay it out and explain it is so easy to follow. It's so educational. And I just thought that's what I always strive. Remy has summed up in 29 minutes how to beat every animal's eyes on the mountains and get close to them. And if I'm trying to explain something, you do it in the most efficient and educational way. And now your next episode is the nose. And I think you and I and Randy would all agree that beating especially an elk's nose is really the key to getting close to them. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there. Randy and I at the beginning of every episode in our intro, we say if you want to learn something about elk hunting, this isn't the podcast. There, we'll try to find one that we can send you to. If there's a podcast out there that is going to be educational and concise and entertaining, it's definitely the new Live Wild podcast with Remy Warren. So just want to make sure that people know where to find you. But so back to Randy's point, as you're describing getting in, early September on those bulls, and you like to get in close to their bedding area, whether they have cows or not. I mean, you're singing my language right there, because I love that. And there aren't a lot of us who like to hunt elk in their bedding areas. And I think it's somewhat controversial. People always say if you hunt an elk in their bedding area, you're going to blow them out. They're going to leave the country, and you're going to ruin the hunting for everyone else. So, what do you say to that?
I was like, I'll be eating backstraps before I worry about what everyone else is doing. I'm not too worried about it. I was like, there's going to be one less hunter in there, because I'll probably have tagged out. I hunt bedding areas a lot. I call in a lot of elk middle of the day. There's a lot of tactics, and I mean the other thing is, you bump an elk out of its bedding area, but there's, I kind of pick those spots based on the type of topography and the type of like vegetation. So, I might hunt some other place or some other area, or if something happens, but you could blow them out at any time. It's not just blowing them out of their bedding area. I think it's actually a pretty good, in my opinion, it's a good place to kind of target, especially when things aren't going like, when you're kind of on the elks. I like to make the elk on my terms. And so that's when they're in their bedding area, I can kind of dictate what's going on. Now there's a lot of legwork and other things, but if you play it right, it can be a pretty effective way to hunt. And maybe, like a lot of times in the middle of the day, the winds are a lot more steady. So like you said, you aren't tricking their nose, but the mornings and the evenings is the hardest time to trick their nose. But the dead middle of the day in the mountains, if you've got a little bit of breeze, it can be fairly consistent. Or even the thermals, sometimes the wind might be swirling, but it's hot enough that it's just taking your scent straight up, and you can get away with a little bit more and have yourself some pretty good opportunities. So I don't mind it. I think that there's, I guess there probably are people. Now, it just depends too. If I saw some elk and I was like on them and they moved into a spot that I was like, well, maybe I'd have a better chance of getting them in the evening, then I'm not going to go in there. But if it's a situation where, hey, I'm having trouble finding elk, or I'm having trouble whatever, then I'm going to go to places where I'm pretty sure they're going to be and throw out some calls that I think will definitely work. And I found a lot of success doing that. So I try to just to play it on what the elk are doing and, what's going on for that particular day even.
Yeah, no, and I think, you mentioned a couple things there, but one of the hardest things to do first thing in the morning and then late at evening is hunt an elk, because they're on the move. They're going from their feeding areas to their bedding areas. If a bull has cows, you're chasing him up the mountain, bugling to him. It's really hard to get that bull to turn around and leave his cows to come into your calls. And so you're basically chasing. You hear people talk all the time, the bull just bugled and ran. And there's a reason for that. If he's still bugling and he's moving away from you, he probably isn't, he hasn't winded you. If he's keeping vocal, it's probably because he's just following his cows back to the bedding area. And, they might go several miles, and a lot of times hunters give up before they get there. Same is true in the evening. Plus, you also have the thermals to worry about that are going to be changing. The elk are moving with the changing thermals. They're going up the mountain as the thermals are coming down, hoping to get to that bedding area about the time the thermals change. And so you have a lot of things going against you to hunt an elk, during that first 2 or 3 hours in the morning. And like you said, when they get to that bedding area, the thermals change. They become consistent for 6 hours there. So usually, and like you said, maybe not consistent, but at least it's warm enough that the thermals are moving up and you can get above that elk and have a good chance. Plus, now that elk's not moving, his cows are bedded down. If he has cows, he's in his territory and doesn't want another bull coming in there close. So there's a lot of things that really add up to an advantage during that middle of the day hunt that would be a disadvantage outside of that time. And you're exactly right. When you said you're eating backstraps, I always say I think I displace more elk in little white game bags than I do by busting them out of their bedding areas. So
yeah, definitely.
We're definitely on the same wavelength there.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, for me, when I think about elk calling, it's, in my opinion, just really a game of proximity and, understanding what the elk are going to do and their behavior. And the easiest way to kind of when they're sitting there, you can get in their bedroom and you can be in proximity to where they want to come in. When it's morning time, you're probably chasing, like you say, you're chasing them. It's hard to get ahead of them. Yeah, you can get things to work, but it takes a lot of work. And it's not that I don't try, but I would say most of the elk I kill are probably when they've stopped, when they've got their cows, and I've changed up my plans a little bit and got in tight and then made that call that they liked, and they couldn't resist and come in. And actually, doing a lot of guiding. It's a tactic that I kind of had to use because it's like we'd chase elk all morning and I'd be like, well, these guys are dead tired. This is the way that I like to hunt. I'll chase them all day, but they'd be like, can we maybe pinpoint them a little bit better and not be running all morning?
Well, you guys ought to hunt together then, because I'm right there with the guy who's like, do we have to run all day long, or can we just stop and take a chocolate break here or something?
Randy says that, but if you watch the last episode of Destination Elk, you know that Randy will chase up and down the mountain all day long as there's a grouse in front of him.
That's what I've heard. So long as there's no grouse in there, no grouse distractions will be good, right?
Then it's break time once the grouse are either the limited grouse. My best elk hunting days are after I got my limited grouse. I seem to be a little more focused at that point.
Well, Randy changes elk hunting locations based on the grouse numbers.
Yes, I do.
That's pretty good.
So? I'm not very good at killing elk, so I got to do something to entertain myself along the way. But as far as how aggressive or not aggressive you call when you get in close like that, when you're in those bedding areas, is it?
I call really aggressive. Yeah, I mean, I've always had like the philosophy. I think, we've all heard this, like people say like, oh, they're call shy. And I think a lot of the people misinterpret elk behavior for elk. Like, I don't know, hunters, we in our mind think that we're just like so human centric that we think that we did something. It's like we made a bugle and they're going away, so they don't like us. And it's like, if I was a real elk and I made that bugle, that elk is doing the exact same thing. So understanding that behavior makes a big difference. And I like to call. I don't know if it's, I kind of relate it to like fly fishing. There's guys on the river that only throw dry flies. I like to bugle elk in. That's just my personal way that I like to hunt. It's the personal way that I like to kill elk. It's the personal way that I feel like, I was like, maybe there's, tactics and things that I could do where, it's not that, but I love that bugling interaction. So I get aggressive with calling. I bugle a lot. I call a lot because I like that interaction. And I like to call elk that way. And I've gone to places where people are like, you can't call elk here. It doesn't work. And we call in elk. So I think it's just a matter of understanding the elk and then like being consistent with it.
Corey, you were smiling really big while Remy was saying that. We got the video feed going so we can see each other's reactions. The audience can't see it. But while Remy was talking about that, Corey was beaming very big.
It's like he is reading straight out of my playbook, and I'm reading straight out of his. And there aren't a lot of people that like aggressive calling and calling a lot. And as he was saying, that's for me. That's the thrill of elk hunting. That's the greatest adventure in any hunting is a vocal interaction at the level that you can get with an elk, and being able to, every elk's different, and you aren't going to be able to bugle aggressively to every single elk, but I'm probably going to try. And if it doesn't work, then I'll go find the one that it's going to work on, because that style of hunting is just so incredibly fun. And, it is, they're an animal. Their IQs, it's all about instinct and survival. So it's not like they're smart and they're analyzing. They're sitting back there going, okay, is that a human or is that an elk? They hear a bugle, they're interested. In some degree, they hear any vocalization, you've got their interest. And then it's just a matter of getting them to come in. And, I don't know Remy's philosophy on it, but I try to keep it simple, and I don't worry about, a language that they're speaking. And what did that elk just really say? Was he saying, I don't worry about that. I just try to figure out what emotion it's going to take to trip a trigger and get that elk to come in. And really, when you boil it down, an elk's going to come into calls either because he wants to breed a cow that he hears or he wants to fight a bull that he hears. And you've just got to find a way to trigger that in that bull to either make him think there's a cow there to be bred or there's a bull there to be fought. And that's when you boil it down that simple, you can get really, you can go really freestyle with your calling and just have a lot of fun.
No, yeah, I definitely have a lot of fun when I'm calling, and it tends to work. And I think you're right. It's not. I mean, I hate to say it. I would I definitely know that I'm not the best elk caller in the world, but I'm good at calling an elk. And I think that you could maybe be like the best, make the best sounds and whatever. And maybe still not call in as many elk, is because you're right. It's that, like, I just think of it like, if I just put myself in the place of that animal, like, okay, I am pissed. I am a bull that's pissed and whatever, and acting. And then not even that, but just timing and proximity too has a lot to do with it, of just knowing where to be, when to make a call, as opposed to like what calls to make. I think that, and yeah, man, I mean, there's been times where, like, a lot of the elk that I call in for people, I'm running around, bugling and running and like smashing sticks. And there's nothing more exciting or more fun. And, like you said, there's, if you like to call, I mean, there's me personally, like if I'm elk hunting and I'm just out by myself, I'm elk hunting and I'm like bugling and I see some elk that just don't want to bugle. I go like, oh, I could sneak in there and kill that bull. I'll just walk past them and go find one that wants to play. Like, I just have to be honest, like, I mean, it can be really effective to sneak in. I think elk are really easy to sneak in on. So it's like, it can be a super effective tactic and a great way to kill big bulls. But I just generally, if it's like September and I have the option to call them, I'm just not interested in it. I'd just rather go find one that wants to play, or wait until that one wants to get fired up. Because that's fun. Yep. That's the whole reason we do this.
I say the same thing. I'll walk by 100 elk in a canyon to find one elk that's bugling. And that's because, and face it, if you're trying to call in an elk, you have to find one that's being vocal. I mean, yeah, you can go and try to get in there and you can work all your magic and be really persistent, and eventually that elk might talk. But the chances of him coming in, if he's not vocal to your calls, if he does come in, he's going to be super wary. It's going to be a lot harder to get set up and get a shot. You get an elk that's spouting off every time you break a branch, every time you cow call, every time you bugle, that bull's just begging to come into your setup. And so, that's, if you want to be the most efficient hunter you can be and you want to use calls, you've got to find an elk that's matching the attitude and is ready for that style of hunting. And yeah, I'll walk right by 100 elk and find one that is. And that's why, I'm not a trophy hunter. And like, Remy was saying, he's in a unit where a 270, maybe a 300-inch bull's top end. We're looking for a representative bull. And, you had a raghorn that you heard bugling and you had to pull yourself away from it because you knew that there was a chance you'd end up killing it. I'm the same way. An elk comes bugling in my face into a setup. It's not about, oh, is that a 300-inch 6-point? Is that a raghorn? That's a bull that's bugling, and that's what I'm there to experience, and that's what I'm there to do. And it's there've been several 5-points that have made the mistake of bugling in my face, and I couldn't keep my finger off the trigger.
Oh yeah, I've been there many a times. But that's the fun. Like when I'm guiding guys or whatever, I say, like, my philosophy is, I tell them, we're looking for someone that wants to play. Like, we might go 5 and in this amount of time, we're going to find a bull that wants to play. And that's our goal, is like just finding the bull that wants to play. And I like that because it's like we're seeking a certain type of encounter, but once you get those encounters, and by actually passing up other opportunities to do other things, you really get a lot of experience calling and working bulls and knowing what works. And then sometimes, just based on that knowledge, okay, well, I can work some marginalized bulls that I see that maybe, might not respond to this certain thing, but they're going to respond to this. Or, if I move in, like say, okay, this bull's not really fired up, but there's some cows in there and he's going into bed. I bet you I could get that bull fired up at midday if I do this, or, just playing with different tactics, trying to figure out what gets bulls fired up.
So Remy, let me ask you, how do you find that bull that wants to play?
For me, this is maybe I'm giving too many. You are right. We're gonna tell everybody exactly how to kill bulls, and it's gonna be bad for us. I mean, I always start super early and try to find the ones that are like, like, try to figure out where the bulls are first. Like, that's my thing, is like, okay, I'm locating, and I do a lot of calls. In my opinion, there's no such thing as over calling, because I'm trying to find a bull that wants to respond to a call. And my podcast this week is actually about the way sound travels in the mountains, and I called it "Can You Hear Me Now?" But you can't call in a bull if it can't hear you or you can't hear it. So the topography and the way the trees are and everything plays a huge factor in whether a bull can actually even hear that call. And that depends on like my call frequency. So if I'm in an area, I might be calling until I actually, like moving spots. And I kind of like to find spots like you would think of a glassing spot where you get really good glassing. I think of like sound spots where I get really good sound where I can hear back and cover a lot of country with my calls and just effectively call, use a lot of location calls to try to get to a bull to fire up. Then it's like, okay, I know there's a bull here. I know there's a bull here. Knowing where those elk are is the start of it. And then just once I get those bulls fired up, working those elk or maybe finding multiple places where I've got bulls where I could just go there and just get them started at least, kind of identifying where they are and what elk might want to make noise, and then kind of picking the bull that I think is going to be the one that makes the noise, and then moving in and doing the whole calling thing and trying hopefully get them to come in.
Has anyone ever left a note on your truck telling you call too much?
Yes, definitely. And I'm like, yeah, I've had that happen where, guys are like, oh, we heard you calling over there. So, geez, you've sore throat. Oh yeah. Like, yeah, cool. Like we're packing out a bull today. It doesn't really matter. I keep going back to that, but it's like the proof is in the pudding. It's like, maybe if everybody did that, but I feel like I've got this philosophy that like, elk are gonna do elk things. They have to bugle, they have to breed, they have to find each other, they have to do certain things. And so, if elk are doing elk things, like, if I'm calling at every point where I think that, I got to call into this ridge and call into this ridge and call into this spot and call into that spot, I'm not really buggering anything up. If they aren't making noise back, they aren't making noise back. But if they don't necessarily care what that elk over there is doing, if they don't care, and if they do care, then they're going to bugle back. And so I'm looking for those bugle back bulls.
Yep. That's what we had a note left on our truck one time that said, if you were up this drainage this morning, you bugle way too much. And we found the note on the windshield as we were packing out the first load of elk, and thought it was kind of ironic that somebody was spending the middle of their day to ride their four-wheeler around and look for our truck to leave a note while we were up taking care of an elk that we had spent a lot of time bugling with that morning. And it's just funny.
Yeah, but it's different, different styles too. I imagine if you don't call and you just spot and stalk and you hear somebody like just all this bugling going on, you're probably like, oh, I don't know. Geez, what is that guy doing? He's just letting the elk know everywhere he's at while he's trying to like sneak around. But I don't know. In my opinion, just like the way that I like to hunt, I think September is for being loud. Just like, I don't know.
That's a t-shirt. That's a t-shirt right there. September is for being loud.
Yeah. Oh, that's funny. So, Remy, I know it's hard to draw a tag in Nevada, so maybe you don't get a chance to hunt Nevada elk that much. Corey, your season in Idaho opens early. A lot of people will say, well, they aren't going to respond until September 12th or something. Do you change what you guys have been talking about? Do you do it differently September 2nd than you are these other times of the season?
That's a good question. I don't know if I do a lot different. I've called in big bulls in end of August, like in Nevada. But I also like kind of try to match the temperaments of the elk that I'm calling to too. So like you say, you got to find one that wants to play, but also it's like, well, what are the elk kind of doing where you're at? If they aren't making a lot of noise, then I use different calls and I kind of use different setups, and I focus on different areas and a different type of calling, because it's not that those elk aren't like, earlier. Sometimes I found like if they're bugling, then I immediately go to bugle default mode. If it's like I think that they're more bulls kind of checking things out, then sometimes I might use more cow calls then, and kind of focus on areas where it's like, okay, I'm kind of focusing on finding a lone bull, and actually lone bulls are the easiest bulls to call in. So sometimes it actually is beneficial to hunt those early seasons, because you can find elk that are in their summer patterns still. So it's like, their locations, and then you can kind of single out those big bulls before they get big groups of cows. It's actually, in my opinion, probably the best 2 times a year to kill big bulls are probably like the beginning of September and the beginning of October, I think, because they're just kind of like, that's when they're by themselves and they're easiest to get in.
Yep. Couldn't agree more. And I love that early part of September. Once they break up from their bachelor groups and they move into those staging areas where they are by themselves, they haven't got in with the cows yet, but they're ready for the rut. I mean, they're there, they're rubbing every tree within 100 yards of that little bedroom that they're staging in. And if you can find a bull in there, he doesn't, they've split up from the bachelor groups because they don't want company. They're irritable and they want to be left alone. And you go in there running your mouth and a bull's there by himself with no cows. And he's like, I don't have to worry about somebody stealing my cows. He's close to my bedroom. I'm irritable. And that's the time to target those big bulls that don't have cows. Once they get the cows, they're focused on one thing. And it can be really hard to pull those herd bulls away from their cows once they're focused on breeding. So I haven't had as much luck first part of October. But again, I think it depends, like you were mentioning earlier, different areas, different topography, different things, the demographics of the elk. If those big herd bulls, like in Arizona when I hunted down there, it seemed like, we hunted these elk for a week straight and didn't see any of those big herd bulls. And then overnight, there were herd bulls with every group. It was like they just showed up overnight, took over the herds, they bred for 10 days, and then they were gone and they just vanished again. And so, here in Idaho, we'll have herd bulls still the end of October with the herds breeding cows and still talking sometimes. So it's, but yeah, that early part of September, if you're targeting a herd bull before he's with the herd and you want to call him, I think that there's no better time than right then.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, we're going to have to charge for this podcast. You guys are laying down a bunch of gold.
Little
here.
too much information. I got to throw in one thing that doesn't. So every time I go in on elk, I make sure the wind's at my back.
So there we go.
Speaking of that, Remy, you get to hunt with a lot of less experienced hunters, I'm guessing. Just when you guide, you're probably not hunting with people who have 20 years of elk hunting experience. What's one of the things you see they do most often that they shouldn't be doing?
I think it's in the setup and knowing when to move. So like if I'm calling, I can only do, I always like kind of think of it like this. Like when my brother and I go out elk hunting, if there's a bull bugling, we'll probably kill that elk. It's like 90% chance that we'll kill that elk. And it's because one of us knows how to call and the guy that's shooting knows how to set himself in a position or knows when to move and when not to move. And I think a lot of people actually get kind of too timid where they hold back too far. And when they need to move forward, when they need to make a move, when they set themselves behind something, when they need to set themselves in front of something, they, mostly though, it's like they need knowing when to move, like to get closer to that bull, because it's like, hey, I can tell that bull's hanging up. He's not coming any closer. He's going to go to where he's going to go. And I want you to go to where he's going to go as opposed to waiting right here in front of me. So that whole, like, just understanding when to move and how to be aggressive, I think kind of hinders people. I think also, like, you can get away with a lot depending on the type of topography. If it's really timbered and there's cows around, like you can do more movement than I think people think without spooking elk, but being observant. And I think that's like probably the biggest thing. If you just had a guy that knew how to set up, he would kill a bull like almost all the time.
Yep. And that's interesting because, for me, I don't guide. I hunt with the same group of guys, and kind of like you and your brother, we just know if I'm back calling, I know Donnie's going to pick the right setup and be in the best position to be able to kill that bull. And if I'm out front setting up, I know Donnie's going to be doing what he needs to do on the calls to get that bull into my setup. So I don't get the experience of hunting so much with less experienced people. My children, but they've been brainwashed since they were little. So even though they didn't get to experience it, they were told so many times what to do that it kind of came natural. But what I see from other hunters in the field most often for me is a lack of observance of the wind. And so many times they'll pop out 300 yards above an elk that's bugling down there and start bugling and moving in on it with the wind at their back. You mentioned that, hey, we're going to have to tell people that they need to move in with the wind at their back just to make them less successful here. But I do see that so often from inexperience, and even hunters that have been doing it for 5, 6, 7 years that haven't filled a tag yet. The elk just go quiet every time I bugle. The elk just go quiet. Well, yeah, when the wind's blowing straight from you to them and you're 300 yards away, they're going to go quiet and move off. And so it's interesting just to see that different perspective, that the setup piece of it is so critical when you're hunting with someone who's not as experienced, that they might just sit there and that bull might be at 120 yards raking a tree, and they're just going to sit there and hope that that bull walks into their setup. Whereas someone like you or myself would know, hey, if that bull's raking a tree 120 yards up there, sprint as fast as you can, 40 yards or whatever, and try to cover some of that distance and take a risk with being aggressive there on the movement too.
Yeah, and I do agree with you. I do see guys moving in on elk with bad wind. When I'm guiding or whatever, the guys are pretty close to me. It's pretty much like directing and then saying like here, and most of the elk I end up killing, I'm pretty close to the caller, only because I'd rather take that. Because people setting up is so bad, I'd rather actually just like help them. Okay, I'm just going to treat it like I'm calling an elk by myself, trying to kill it myself. But yeah, it does make it difficult. But yeah, factoring in the wind, knowing how to set up, and then having somebody that can work the bull makes your success rate go up considerably.
Absolutely.
So in Montana, our elk seasons go later, even into early October. A lot of states, the archery seasons close, I don't know, end of September 30th or whatever. Anything different that first week of October, that first 10 days of October?
Yeah, I will say, so I mean, I guess I didn't clarify earlier when I said like the best time to kill a big bull would be like that beginning of October. And I would say that's for guys that like to spot and stalk, because they aren't as like the big bulls generally. Well, it depends on the season. Sometimes they're fired up, and it just depends on the year really. But most of the time, like once the main breeding's done, the real big bulls kind of pull off from those groups, and they've had their butt kicked. They're isolated. Like they don't want to really mess around too much. Maybe if like there's some cows come cruising through, kind of like that similar thing. Like they might go investigate it if you're close. But like a lot of times they're off by themselves, and when they're by themselves, they're super easy to sneak on, obviously, and then they can be susceptible to certain calls, or at least out of like curiosity, especially when it's like, oh, maybe some cows. It's like, oh, a free date, cool, like came over to my house. They might not even bugle back, but they might come check them out. So I do like that last week of October, if it's quiet and I want to find a big bull, I would generally probably do more glassing then, and then base my calling off of what I'm seeing, not necessarily what I'm hearing. Now you can get like a lot of action too with those like younger bulls that are now controlling the herd, and they're kind of dumb. Like they don't really know what's going on. They're just like, yeah, we're in charge now. This is awesome. Dad's not here. Bully's gone. We get to do what we want. Maybe I can be the bully. So they can actually be fairly easy to call in then too. It just depends on the year and like how much activity there is. But for like the bigger bulls, it can be a pretty good technique or tactic for stalking in. And I know like calling elk is like it takes a lot of practice and a lot of doing, and you're going to be real unsuccessful for a while probably if you're just getting started. I mean, it's a super successful tactic once you figure it out, but you're going to make mistakes. You're going to do things that don't work, and you're going to learn from them. So I think there's a lot of guys out there that's like, hey, I'm going on 1 or 2 elk hunts and I just want to be successful. Maybe the stalking tactic is your tactic. I don't think everybody has to call, but that's just the way that I like to hunt, and I find a lot of success that way. Once you figure it out, like if you live somewhere where there's elk, then you should really try to figure it out, because 1, it's a lot of fun, and 2, it's consistently successful. But yeah, I guess there's that aspect of it too, where you can be really successful and take good bulls if you want to do the stalking method or whatever.
No, and I think that there's probably more consistent methods. Sitting a tree stand over a wallow, spot and stock. I think that you can be more consistent if you know what you're doing there. Calling is so hit and miss. You get a hot, dry part of the season. You take the second week of September off and it should be phenomenal, but you got a full moon and it's hot and dry, and whatever's going on, it can be tough, and you put all your eggs in that basket, and that week you probably should have been sitting over water or spot and stocking. But when you have the luxury to be able to hunt a couple weeks in the season, you're going to have a few days where calling is just incredible, and it's going to be the most fun and probably the most effective on those couple of days. But I always say, people who can spot and stalk any animal are hands down better hunters than I am being able to call an elk. I mean, I don't have to be a great hunter to be able to call an elk on a certain day when that elk is just, he's ready to play. I can go out there and blow a couple bugles and the elk's going to be standing in a setup. It does take practice. You do have to know how to set up. You have to know how to get that bull. But you see hunters all the time, their first time hunting elk, that call a big 6-point bull into a setup and they're successful. And then you see people have been hunting for 12 years and have never filled a tag and, haven't had a bull standing 20 yards broadside in front of them. So it's just, I think those people who are good at spot and stalk, I would say, are far better hunters than I am. I just, like Remy, there's just nothing like calling an elk, and I'll put all my eggs in that basket every September.
Yeah.
Well, you guys,
Randy, why did you laugh there? What you almost tipped over in your chair laughing.
I know. Well, you said something, Corey. You're like, well, it doesn't take much. You just go up and make a couple calls. And I'm thinking to myself, yeah, easy. Yeah, sure. Okay. There's nothing to it. Right. Yeah.
On the right day, in the right area with the right elk, it doesn't take a lot of skill to call in that elk.
Yeah, but let's face it, there's a lot of us who've lucked out and found that one elk on that one day. And then I think, boy, I know what I'm doing here. Boy, I could have killed him easy. Try to do that consistently in hot conditions, in wet conditions, in windy conditions, early season, kind of when the peak rut is waning into the post rut. It's the how do I get good enough to do it when it's tough? It's kind of like anyone can catch fish on certain days. It's the good guys who catch fish every day.
So I think for the people that want to luck into the right bull on the right day in the right place, the Elk Talk podcast is for them. And for those who want to be consistently successful, they need to check out Remy's podcast.
There you go.
I will say that, I mean, you're right there. There are a lot of tactics, and that's the one thing with guiding that's like, I've got a guy for 5 days, so I have to hunt him to the best to get him an elk. When I'm hunting myself, it's a different game. It's like I play my own game. I play by my own rules. I do what I enjoy. When it's with someone else, then, the tactics change, the things that I do change, and I play it. There might be times where I say, and it sucks, but we're just going to go sit water for 4 days and throw out some cow calls and do it that way. Or it's going to be, it's late. We're going to try to stalk these elk, or it's going to be peak rut. We're going to find one that wants to play. So it just depends on, the scenario and the setup. And you're right. Like every week is different, but I think that for the most part, if you have a tactic that you really like to do and you do it all the time, you get really good at making that tactic work. Guys that I know, some of the best elk hunters I know, don't even own an elk call. They just sneak in on elk every time. And it's like that tactic works for them. They know how to work it throughout the season because that's the tactics they use. Me, I generally feel like I can call elk from pretty much the end of August through the beginning of October because that's how I've hunted elk the most. And so it's like I know those tactics for those times and those situations, and it changes a little bit, but by doing it, you kind of start to figure out, okay, here's what's working this time, here's what's working this time, here's what will work next time, kind of thing.
Do you guys think that some people who say they only get a week off, or maybe they don't live in elk country, so they only get to hunt elk every 2 or 3 years or whatever, do you think very often people come to their place where they're going to elk hunt, and they're like, this is what I'm going to do. And they do that, even though the elk might be telling them something else. Or they just like, this what worked last year, and I'm going to do that every day. And then they're like, oh, the elk are call shy, or the elk blew out, or whatever. In the rifle hunting I do, very often it seems like when people are asking me questions, it's that they just said, I'm doing this regardless of what the weather conditions or what the situation is telling them. And so they get stuck in a rut, and they can't replicate what happened the year before because they're not being as adaptable as maybe they should be. Do you see that a lot in archery season?
Oh yeah, I for sure see that a lot. I also think, what you see a lot is like people. I mean, if you come in from somewhere and maybe it's a new area or whatever, and you're just getting into it, like maybe you hunted there one other time, you don't really know. Like, the trouble's finding where the elk are, and you might think that they were here last year, just like you said, they were here last year, but conditions were different last year. Maybe it's a dry year and they're up way higher, so the elk were going crazy here, and they aren't adapting for the particular conditions that are there. They're just going off of, and that's kind of the hard part, is so you got 7 days to hunt, and a lot of guys spend most of their time trying to figure out what the elk are doing, where they are. And then when they finally find them, then they can try these things, but they might only have 1 or 2 days to do it, or they just happen to show up at a spot and that's where the elk are. And then they're in elk. But, I think like that's kind of one of the things. The best thing for elk hunting is just being able to do it multiple years in a row in the same place, and you get really good really fast because you cut down that learning time of like what the elk are doing, where they are, and then you can kind of take that anywhere. It's like guys that have a lot of elk hunting experience, grew up elk hunting, we kind of know it's like, well, this year they're going to be here, this time of year, look at the snow, they're going to be here. Like throughout the entire season you can kind of adjust your tactics.
Yeah, and I see, I get emails all the time from people after season that, hey, I went to Colorado and I hunted for 8 straight days and I didn't see a single track or hear a single bugle. Like, well, did you stay in the same place the whole time? Yeah, I stayed in the same place the whole time. So it was a good looking area, or somebody told me that it was a good spot. And I don't stay in the same place for 24 hours if there's no tracks and no bugles there. I'll be mobile. I'll go 20 miles away and drive and hit another mountain and look for elk there. But yeah, I think finding elk is the hardest part. That's really, once you find elk, then you get to hunt them. But until you find them, you aren't even hunting. You're looking for elk at that point. And that's probably the most critical part. You have to find the elk before you can even hunt them. So getting stuck in a rut and just, using the same tactic over and over when it's not working, or hunting the same place over and over when there's no elk there, I see it way too often. And, I've had somebody just recently say, hey, last year I followed your e-scouting advice and I found this north face and there was feed and there was water and all the perfect things there. And I went there and hunted for 7 days and didn't even see a track or hear a bugle the whole time I was there. And they're like, what should I do different? I'm like, well, you didn't follow my e-scouting method very closely, because my e-scouting method says have at least 10 backup areas and try every one of them if you aren't finding elk in the first one. And that's honestly, you've got to be so versatile and mobile, not only in areas but in tactics. And if you only have 1 week to hunt, or like Remy, he's got 5 days to get it done with somebody that has no experience elk hunting, you aren't going to be able to just hunt one style. You've got to cater to that individual's need. You've got to cater to what the elk are doing, what the weather's doing, all those different things. You have to be super versatile there. And I think that extends just as much into an individual hunting. They've got to be ready to adapt every minute.
Absolutely.
Yeah. This year in my applications, I'm forcing myself to do some elk hunts during periods where I normally don't elk hunt. For kind of what you mentioned, Corey, is I always struggle in the beginning of September. I don't know why. I think it's just because as a conservative accountant, I have a tendency to be way too passive about how I approach it. I don't move enough. It's like, all right, I'm going to force myself to go and do this for the first 10 days of September, not because I think I'm going to kill an elk, but I'm going to learn a lot. And most of my eventual successes and knowledge come from forcing myself out of my comfort zone. I mean, if I wanted to kill an elk every year, I'd go hunt November 10th through the 20th, and I'm pretty sure I'd kill an elk every time. But that's because that's when I do most of my elk hunting. So I've got a pretty good experience base to draw from there. But I think what makes me a better elk hunter is forcing myself to go into those situations that cause me to think more like an elk at that time of year. And so I suck at killing elk the first week of September. So if you see me killing elk the first week of September this year, you'll know that there's at least one dumb elk in every population, and I happen to stumble into them. So, but Remy, if all things are equal and they say you can go hunt anywhere, any species, there's no constraints, where are you going and what are you bringing with you? Your bow, your rifle, your spear?
I'd definitely be bringing my bow. I don't know. It's just so hard to say. The one thing I do, I love calling elk and hunting elk, but I think on the challenge side, I think I love hunting mule deer. Like the spot and stock game of it is, especially with my bow, I think it's pretty challenging. I can always go call elk for other people and just be completely satisfied, in many ways. But when it comes to my own hunts and challenge, I think mule deer's pretty high on the list. Like trying to find a mature buck and take it with my bow, I think is pretty challenging. It's something that I try to, I don't actually, it's been a while actually since I've dedicated as much time as I used to, but, probably because it is the time thing of you really need to put in some time to make it work out. But I don't know, man. It's definitely between elk and deer. But if it was me with the bow in my hand, I'd probably go for the mule deer because I would know that I could go call for 100 people during the September and be super stoked on it.
Well, given the track record of what you have with large mule deer, that answer doesn't really surprise me.
Yeah.
So Remy, I've got to ask. You've hunted red stag.
Yep.
You've hunted axis deer.
Yep.
Have you hunted Sitka deer?
I have not hunted Sitka, but I have hunted Rusa.
And have you hunted fallow?
I have. Yep.
So how similar are those to hunting elk? Because they all call, they get pretty aggressive with calling.
Yep, they do. They're so red deer and elk are the same. They can interbreed, it's almost identical. It's one of those things that always makes me laugh too, because I've got a lot of people that listen or follow stuff from the South Pacific, because I've done a lot of stuff down there, and they're always like, how much do these tactics between elk and red deer interchange? And I'm like, essentially, you just change the type of call, a bugle for a roar, and it's the same thing for the most part. There's a couple things that are a little bit different. For the most part, very similar. And then you got guys that hunt turkeys, and they just assume that calling elk and calling turkeys are the same. I'm like, oh, the audacity, how dare you?
I can't even stand to go on Instagram from April 15th through May 15th because everybody's hunting turkeys, and they're like, it's just like hunting elk. And it's oh my goodness, if I hear one more person say that.
But I will say the hunting red deer is very similar to hunting elk. Hunting Rusa and Sambar are very similar as well. They aren't as vocal. The Rusa can be pretty vocal, but the Sambar are a little less vocal, I would say, a little more solitary. But I would say, very similar in a lot of them. The fallow deer, I love hunting fallow deer, especially when they're croaking. It's a little bit different though, because they don't exhibit the same behaviors as elk do. So they're more they're super, super aggressive, and they can definitely be called in, but they also have these rut pads that they stay on. And so you might get a fallow that's just croaking, he's got his pad and he's just like just croaking from this one particular location, and then you've got others that have the does and do their thing. So I don't know, hunting fallow deer is actually extremely fun and exciting. But yeah, it's really cool. Like their rut behavior is, I would say, different, but it's like it's something else. It's like they're so aggressive that it makes it really fun. And then a lot of the axis deer, they're just more of like a big herd animal, so they're just in a lot of herds. I would say that their like interactions are not the same as elk. They kind of have like different habits, and it's more like you use the calls to locate them, but you aren't really calling them in very often because they're always in groups of 100 or more, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Wow. That's a big herd.
Yeah. Unless you've got like, I mean, I've used like predator, fawn, and distress calls and called in like 300 deer at once. That's kind of cool.
I think I saw a video of that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty fun.
Man, I'm just thinking, how would you get in on something like that? Because this last year I was in central Montana, and we had, it was a drought year, so the elk were consolidated in the very few places where there was good vegetation, good forage. And so we're running into groups of 150 and 200, and the audience is, why aren't you calling them in? Why aren't you just running in there and getting them to come in? Well, first of all, it's really open country, and those elk they usually look around before they approach too quickly. And then it's like, well, how do you separate a bull from 150 or 60 cows? Maybe there's a way to do that, but for you to say bringing in 100, 200, 300 deer, it'd be like, whoa, let me get out of the
way. Exactly. Yeah, you got to be very sneaky. You actually do bring up a good point, though. I think one thing that people underestimate when it comes to being successful elk hunting is picking the spot based on the style of hunting that you're going to do. If I talk about elk calling, like where I hunt elk in September is not where I'm going to hunt elk in October. Like I like calling, so I like to pick those places where you aren't going to spot elk. They have to be vocal. And so I hunt really thick stuff in September. Like I love hunting timber. Whereas if you're a spot and stock guy, do not go in that timber. You're going to not see elk, and you're going to be really pissed off. You're going to say, I went 8 days and didn't see a track or a sign of elk. It's like, well, yeah, makes sense. Go in that open country. But if you're a caller and you go into that open country, you're going to see a lot of elk, but you're going to really get frustrated calling elk in. So picking I do that with a lot of species. It's like, man, I tailor where I'm going to hunt based on the type of topography and the type of hunting style that I want to do at that time. Because otherwise you're kind of chasing your tail from the beginning of like, you're trying to force your type of hunting into a scenario that just does not work well for it.
That's gold right there. I mean, the number of people I see who come to the open areas of central Montana and complain, you can't call these elk in. Well, they're very visual. They get to the farthest ridge away and they're like, I'd be able to see that elk if it was here. Yeah, I'm going back the other way.
Absolutely.
We're keeping people a long time, but since we got you here, Remy, we want to give people even more than their money's worth. We do have a money back guarantee on our podcast.
Yeah.
Whatever people pay to listen to this podcast, we'll refund it. And when I say that at sport shows, like I've been doing this spring, they look at me and they say, well, I don't pay to listen to that. I'm like, that's why we got a money back guarantee.
That's why the podcast's money back guarantee, but this Q&A right here at the sports show is not.
Yeah.
Where are you going with this Live Wild podcast? Where do you see it going? What's it going to be?
Yeah, I mean, really, I like to be able to share these kind of tips and tactics and things that I've picked up. So it kind of is two parts. Like I share a story generally every episode. And so a little bit of story. And I feel like a lot of people, I kind of started doing that because it's a little bit of an entertainment factor, but also people learn a lot from stories. One of the fun things that I never thought of with Solo Hunter is people, like the main comment would be, man, I've learned so much. Like I got an elk because I watched and I was like, what? I was just hunting. And that's like, and then I realized, man, people are learning by seeing it or hearing how something went down. So I think, stories are very educational. But but also, can be pretty entertaining as well. And then kind of dissecting some kind of tip. Oftentimes it has to do with the story, or, maybe this is a tip that I use or a tactic that I use, because there's so many tactics. And, maybe many stories have, you're probably employing 500 tactics at once, but trying to really make it digestible and say, here's what I do in these scenarios, and make it where it's like a guy that has 5 days to hunt, might have these things that took me years to learn, and be able to go out there with that kind of knowledge, I think is just going to help people be more successful. So I'm really interested in that. And then we also, a big portion of the podcast is we do question and answer segments where I've got it before I had people type in. So I'm working on this first Q&A will be a call-in thing, so people can call. And I really like to be able to just talk to people about their questions, making the podcast kind of like, I want it to be where I really want people to be more successful. And so if somebody's there's a lot of questions that people have that I don't even think about. I mean, a question that I, answered before was, like, how do you know where to set up your camp? And I was like, I don't even think about it. But when I really, I was like, why are you even worrying about setting where you set your camp up? And then I was like, oh, well, people are probably doing dumb stuff too. So you should probably address these kind of things of like, knowing where people are at and what they want to learn. So a little Q&A portion. And one thing that I did not do in the past, I didn't really have guests, and it was for a couple of reasons. One is, it's just I'm gone. I'm moving all the time. I'm doing, I'm just like, to be able to connect with people is really hard for me. So if I just do the podcast myself, I can do it on any schedule in any place. But I probably will have certain guests for specific topics that are just like very educational. So, I might be reaching out to you guys in the future for a little help with that. Whereas like, hey, here's an expert that does things a certain way, because I think it would be nice to be able to hear from a couple people about certain tactics that, really deep dive into that, those people are really good at that specific tactic. So it might be something like a guy that just exclusively spot and stalks elk the first week of October or something like that, where it's like, okay, we can dissect this tactic with somebody else that also really, really does that. But for the most part, just me telling stories and sharing tips.
Well, if you do need an expert guest, definitely get a hold of Randy and I, because we know a lot of people and we can point you in their direction.
Perfect.
Yeah, we'll be the broker here. Matchmaker.
Yeah.
Some lucky guy is going to be on Remy's podcast. Don't worry, Randy. We'll get our break someday. Just got to keep our eyes open.
Yeah. Wow. I've always admired what you do, Remy. You're great for what we love about hunting. You're humble and modesty probably causes some people to maybe not know how talented you are and how hard you work at it to be really good. So I'm thankful that you'd take time to join Corey and I on this podcast.
Yeah, thank you very much. Appreciate it. No, thanks for having me. I'm excited. I appreciate you guys having me on here and getting to chat. It's always fun chatting with guys that have similar mindsets, and the way it's funny because you go through and you do all this stuff, right? And I mean, I'm sure you know this, Corey, is like when I started hunting, or maybe when you started, it was like the things that we do, people weren't talking about. And I was like, I think that what happened was back in the day, somebody that didn't hunt elk went out, hunted elk, and wrote a book on it, and then every other book was based on that book. It has nothing to do with elk. And the more I learned, the more I'm like, that was 100% true, because I was like, I wish that these kind of, and then it's refreshing to run into people that also like have found out what you found out by doing things kind of similar to you, and you go, okay, it's a validation that is the right way. It's a good way to do things. It works. And maybe the ways that other people have learned over the years really weren't necessarily, maybe guys that had spent a lot of time doing it. So it's nice to know that people that do it a lot kind of find the same, you kind of like, you find the simplest shape. It's like this seems to work because it works. And I really enjoy that aspect of like talking with people and figuring out, oh, these are things that we do very similar and kind of the same. It's really cool.
Yeah. No, and I mean, listening to Remy, it's almost like, I can guarantee that we hunt almost identically when it comes to calling elk. And I haven't learned from Remy, and Remy hasn't learned from me. We've learned from the elk, and to come to that exact same place, it's pretty exciting, because there's not a lot of people that get really aggressive with calling, that rely on calls, and so it's fun to be able to talk to somebody that is like that. And I think you're absolutely right. Way back when people were writing books and teaching people how to hunt elk, I think a lot of that came from marketing. They were trying to market a product, so they're sharing information that is going to lead people to this product. And I think at the end of the day, if you're sharing information to lead people to a product versus sharing information to lead people to success, they might be two different paths completely.
Oh, definitely.
One path is more profitable, I hear.
Yeah.
I don't have any product to sell. I don't have any information to sell, so I don't know what the hell I'm even doing here. Oh man, you got any products to sell, Remy?
Do I? That's a good question. No, I don't think so. I will. I mean, I'll have some stuff here pretty soon. I'm working on some stuff that'll be out pretty soon, but no real products per se.
Yeah, I'm out on your website and I don't even see a store there.
Yeah, I took it down. We had some shirts there for a little bit, but they kind of sold out. So I'll have some stuff here in the coming months. But
cool. Yeah. Where can people find you and find out more about you and listen to your podcast and all the good stuff?
You can listen to the podcast. Just search Live Wild with Remy Warren. Pretty much everywhere podcasts are available. And then you can always find me on Instagram or Facebook. Share some stuff there. And then I've got a website, RemyWarren.com. We've got a little mailing list there. It's so I just try to keep people posted on that. I hate mailing lists because they're always trying to sell something. So every mailing list I give something away. So it's just kind of cool. I figure every time you open it, somebody wins something that's on it. That might be a fun way to do it, or almost every time. So, I just got sick of getting things trying to get me to buy stuff. So I was like, well, I might as well give stuff to people. But it's also a way that I kind of use it to communicate. Oh, here's a new video, or here's an article that I've got, or something like that. So
yeah, that's I'm the same way with mailing lists. We have this large mailing list, and people are like, well, you never send out any emails. I don't know. I just hate being annoyed by email, so I don't want to annoy other people. So
right, yeah. The amount people are probably like, "Oh, it's just another email." I was like, I put more thought into that email than I do anything else in my life.
Well, it's a good thing that all of us have other jobs.
Yeah,
because our media careers, we've not yet solved the riddle of how you make all this money in the media world. But
right.
Moral of that story, folks, if you're wondering, don't quit your day job.
Definitely.
Well, I think we're gonna let folks go, but here's my fear, Remy, is we have this feedback loop where can they ask questions or give comments, Corey?
Just go to elktalkpodcast.com and hit the contact button.
And my fear is that everyone's going to say, why don't you have Remy back on there? That that's that was a podcast actually worth listening to. So
that's a fear of yours. I'm looking forward to it. The more invitations we get to have Remy on, we'll be, hey, you want to come back on our podcast? Because all of our listeners just left and went to your podcast. So
I think the only trouble is they might have learned it all and they don't need to listen to any podcasts anymore. But next time we'll talk about how to stalk elk with the wind at your back. That'll be
there. You go.
Oh gosh. Well, I wouldn't feel right if we didn't give a good plug to the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation in all this. Go out to rmef.org and hopefully become a member, but also click on, they have a tab there called What We Do. And you'll read all kinds of good stuff about what they do for habitat, for access, for everything else. And it's because of volunteer work and contributions that there are elk on the hill that we can have these kind of discussions and podcasts. And Remy and Corey can bugle too much. And, so I think instead of the t-shirt, we should get 2 t-shirts, one for each of you. I bugle too much.
September's for being loud.
Yeah. Yeah.
There you go. Well, Remy, thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Hope you have a great day.
Yeah,
folks, thanks for being here. And now I got to go down to the CPA firm and get my tax return done. Oh, man.
Wait, what are taxes?
Now we know why Remy hunts in other parts of the world so much. Oh, yeah, it's whenever the IRS auditor comes by looking for him.
Just kidding.
He does live in Nevada, though, and I hear there are some different rules in Nevada.
That is true, actually, yeah.
Yeah. Well, we'll leave that for a different podcast. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Catch you on the next one.